Today's show is brought to you by locally owned and operated Highland Rim Speedway. Highland Rim Speedway is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year with great short-track, door-to-door stock car racing in a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. Visit their website at highlandrim.com. Jeff Meeks and Chris Austin invite you to watch your favorite sports event at the Batter's Box at 43 Hermitage Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. The Batter's Box offers shuttle service to all Titans home games. It's a great place for friends to gather for the game and after the game. So check out the Batter's Box Bar and Grill, and thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Hi everybody, coming up next on Pit Pass with Larry Woody, we've got a special guest who is literally a walking encyclopedia of racing knowledge from almost every venue you can imagine, every type. We'll share who that is coming up. Also, preseason thunder at Daytona. Did we learn anything? Yeah, we learned the big one can still be there. And of course, we may actually talk about IndyCars in Nashville. Yeah, we'll do that and more coming up next on Pit Pass.
From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
Allen Cooper CPAs, located in the heart of East Nashville, offer a wide variety of tax services for individuals and businesses. Contact them at 615-257-0646 and visit their website, allcooper.com, for a full list of services.
Microcasting for your city. Talkopolis.
Well, hello everybody and welcome in to Pit Pass. I'm Joe Williams along with my longtime idol Larry Woody. And between us, Larry, a special guest this week, literally a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. One of the most humble men that you'll ever meet, but he knows more about racing both from Nashville to the national and international levels than probably, in all honesty, I know this sounds big, but probably anywhere in this country for sure. Russ Thompson is our special guest. And Russ, it is good to have you.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe. It's good to be here with y'all. I've watched 4 or 5 of the shows, and y'all got a good thing going here, and I just appreciate you having me on.
I wonder if you did like in the old days when I was at the Tennessee, and every time I'd screw something up, Russ would send me a note and say, you had this wrong, and underline it. No, seriously, Joe, at the Tennessee, and I've told Russ this for 40 years, if I had a question or was stumped and I needed an answer, whether it was local racing, Nashville, whatever, I called Russ Thompson, and he had the answer. I could never stump him.
Yeah, and what folks don't understand, when we talk about the wealth of talent that has come out of Nashville, from drivers to crew chiefs to officials to writers, broadcasters, etc. What folks don't understand is, this is kind of the linchpin. We're going to pick on you a little bit here, Russ. This is kind of the linchpin. For the past 30 years, he's been traveling around, and as I explained to somebody earlier, when those guys on the race broadcast sound like they're brilliant and they know everything and they've memorized all these record books. No, they haven't. Russ is sitting there handing them a card.
Like he did me.
Yeah. How long have you been doing that? I mean, you go, what's the official title of that position on a broadcast?
Statistician and historian.
Okay. And when did you start as a statistician historian?
First race I ever worked was the 1988 All-American 400 here at Nashville.
And the big time, you moved up with Network, ABC. When did you start that, Russ?
1994. This will be my 20th year doing IndyCars for Network.
And this year you're traveling the circuit, the entire IndyCar circuit. Still do some, it's interesting, I didn't know this, you work on your stats from home, don't you?
Yeah.
And provide those for a lot of the NASCAR races.
Right, do all the Cup and all the nationwide races from home, and got a call as I was driving here today about doing the 24 hours of Daytona, so.
Now here's the scary part, Larry. How good is Russ Thompson as a statistician historian? When ESPN goes to do the race from Australia, they do most of it from a studio in Charlotte, and they call Russ Thompson and say, get over here. And it's literally a long-range thing. The 24 hours of Daytona coming up. He said that. I said, man, you're going to love Daytona. You know what it's like in February. And he goes, I'm not going to Daytona. You're going to do all this from your home here in Nashville.
Yeah.
How is that technology? Is that not is that a positive for you from a technological standpoint? You don't have to be gone so much?
That part's nice. I mean, the traveling part gets old going as much as sometimes, you know, it's 35, 38 weekends a year. Nice to be home, nice to be with the family, but, you know, when you're not at the track, there's some things that go on that you miss, but mostly what I do, it's all historical based anyway, so not being at the track's not really a big drawback.
One disadvantage, Russ, not going to Daytona, you can't go to the Boot Hill Saloon.
That's
right.
right.
That would be...
And no seafood. That's my highlight
Sitting
of
with a
Daytona.
pool in the sun, but other than that.
Yeah.
You are no stranger to racing yourself. You drove in go-karts and then moved and drove at Nashville for a while.
Raced in go-karts for 27 years and proud of that part of the career. Raced for 4 years in mini modifieds at Nashville, and I don't even consider that part of the career. It was a disaster.
Was that where you got the nickname Crash or Wipeout Thompson?
Well, you know, now that's not fair, Larry, because I only crashed twice. But
neither
gosh,
one were his fault, as I recall.
Well, yeah, the big one wasn't.
Wow.
But gosh, we had such bad luck, and I won the Hard Luck Award 2 years in a row. But it wasn't for crashing.
Yep.
Yep. In a Rax roast beef sponsored car. How's
That's
that?
in Opryland.
Yeah.
But like so many people around here, Russ, you grew up as a racing fan. As you say, you raced go-karts, then began to dabble in some of the amateur, you know, the hobby level events at the fairgrounds, and it just grew from there. Just kind of a labor of love that kind of turned into a pretty good profession for you, didn't
Absolutely. I had an uncle that was single, and he went to Daytona for the first time in 1953. Watched a lot of races on the beach. Went to Indianapolis in 1951. Yep. Well, single, and he owned his own business, so he went racing whenever he wanted to go. And from the time I could walk, he was taking me racing. And the thing that doing IndyCar like I do, having the accent that I have, people are surprised. Hey, you're from Nashville, but you know so much about IndyCars. Well, you got to think back in the '60s, the two closest Cup tracks were Charlotte and Atlanta. You know, Indianapolis and DuQuoin and Springfield was just as close to go from here in Nashville to watch IndyCar racing as it was to watch any kind of major NASCAR racing.
Do you have a preference? You've got a foot in both worlds, stock car and IndyCar, open wheel. Do you have a
IndyCar?
You like it better?
I do like it better.
I know, because you used to call me all the time and complain because we didn't cover enough IndyCar racing, so I kind of figured that. But why is that? What appeals to you? Just the finesse and the speed and the technology and engineering that all you yuppies enjoy so much?
Well, you know, I think a lot of it goes back to what you're first, you know, introduced to.
First love.
And the fact that, we would go, it was nothing for us to jump in the car Sunday morning, go to Salem, Indiana, and watch a sprint car race. And, you know, I can remember watching Parnelli Jones and that Fike Plumbing Sprinter come off turn 4 and a little wisp of blue smoke coming off that right rear tire. Man, as a 6-year-old, I was hooked. I mean, just hook, line, and sinker, I was done.
You saw them all.
I was lucky enough to see them all. I mean, I saw the Novi run at Indy. I saw the Turbine run at Indy. I've been incredibly lucky to see as much as I've seen.
Okay.
Who was your favorite? I mean, before Danica Patrick came along.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean, Andretti, Ford.
Without a doubt, Parnelli Jones.
Parnelli Jones.
Yeah, I mean, he was the guy driving that Fike Plumbing Sprinter, and I'll still put him up today against anybody that's ever sat in a race car.
I always liked Ford.
Wow.
What was your analysis of A.J. Ford?
Oh, great. I mean, great race car driver, but, you know, he and Parnelli were big rivals in the early 60s, so I never was an A.J. fan. And that's odd, because one of the guys that helped get me started in the racing was a guy here in Nashville that owned an Indy car, and he gave A.J. Foyt his very first ride in an Indy car.
Who was that?
John Wills. 1957, John owned an Indy car, the Hoover Motor Express. And I'll tell you the story. They were at a race in Salem, Indiana, and John never went to the grandstands. I mean, he was always in the pits, had to have his hands in the middle of things, but they didn't have a car there. This was an IMCA race. So some of my family and all were there. Well, John sat in the grandstands with them and watched AJ drive, and he told him, he said, look at that kid. He said, he's driving the wheels off that piece of junk. He said, I'm going to hire him for my Indy car, and he did. And AJ drove 5 races in 1957 for a car out of Nashville, and then one of the major teams saw him and hired him for 1958. It was the Dean Van Line's car.
Plucked him right out.
Plucked him right out, and that's how AJ got started.
Who besides Russ Thompson would know that A.J. Foyt got his racing start with a Nashville angle?
And one of my favorite stories on that Nashville car is that John had his shop on Galton Road over in East Nashville. At 3:30 in the morning, they said it was nothing to see an Indy car whizzing up and down Gallatin Road. Now, wouldn't you have liked to have been out after a night drinking, driving home, and all of a sudden
An Indy car comes by.
he's like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm swearing off."
Did I just see what I thought I saw?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, how cool would that have been? But we're talking about back in the 50s.
With that background, Russ, were you surprised or not surprised, or what was your take on the IndyCar fleeing with Nashville Superspeedway? It just, for whatever reason, I thought it was a success. The fans loved it. The media loved it. Indy finally bailed out, I think, 2008 after 5 or 6 years. Why didn't it work? Wrong place, wrong time? Or
No, I don't know why it didn't work. I mean, Firestone's based here.
Yep.
Firestone loved it.
Yep.
One of the major sponsors of the series. I've never understood why they went away.
Everybody seemed to like it. Like you say, the sponsors, the fans, the media, the drivers seemed to like coming in. But the IRL, for whatever reason, decided they...
But I mean, here are you two guys that are lifelong media people in Nashville. How much of a chance in 1999 or 2000 would either one of y'all have given of that race turning out to be the main event at the Superspeedway?
I was skeptical. I didn't think any racing would go over in stock car country, but I was wrong. It did, but still they bailed. They packed up and left after a while.
Yep.
You think we designed this, because that's where we're headed in the second segment to talk about the ground-sucking Widowmakers. We'll talk about that.
Is that an Indy car?
Too. That's an Indy car.
Good.
I got to figure out who came up with that years ago. But one of the other places that I'll bet you Russ has been, you've been to Highland Rim before, many, many times.
When it was dirt.
No, Russ, I'm not going there. There's a joke there. I'm not going to do it to you. But Highland Rim is asphalt now, and they're opening the season in the first part of April. Come join us at Highland Rim Speedway on Bethel Road, just up I-65. You get off there at Bethel Road, make a couple of turns, and you are there at the one place in Middle Tennessee where racing and family truly go together. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Indy cars. We'll figure out exactly what to call them so that we don't upset the folks at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Get it right. Right? We'll be back with more on Pit Pass.
Today's show is brought to you by locally owned and operated Highland Rim Speedway. Highland Rim Speedway is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year with great short track door-to-door stock car racing in a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. Visit their website at highlandrim.com.
And welcome back, everybody, to Pit Pass. Joe Williams, Larry Woody, and our special guest, Russ Thompson. And Russ, when we left, we started the conversation, and this one's going to be a long one too before we're done, about open wheel cars. Let me start there. Open wheel Indianapolis type cars, so that you can tell me exactly what I'm supposed to call them.
It's the IZOD IndyCar series.
Okay.
I mean,
Did you get that, Larry, so that we can type this out right?
and 3 years ago, honestly, they made the mandate, do not call it the IRL anymore.
Okay.
These are Indy cars. And IndyCar is just like NASCAR, and then they have different divisions. They have a ladder series, they have an Indy Lights division, they have the Mazda series, they have, where you can work your way up.
4 cars and 2 cars, yes.
Right, but it's all sanctioned by IndyCar, which is all caps. And then the main series, the IZOD IndyCar series, is capital I, capital C, IndyCar.
So when they started racing here, it used to be the Indy Racing League.
Right,
That was the
the
name of the
IRL,
series,
sure.
like NASCAR.
Right.
And then you had the IZOD series, and then you had what was the second tier series?
Some kind of Indy
Well,
Lights.
Indy
It was
Lights.
Indy Lights.
Yeah.
But it was all under the Indy Racing League, and now you don't have an actual Indy Racing League. It's the Indy
Indy
IndyCar.
Racing League is
Sounds
more
too
like
stick and ballish.
NASCAR.
Yeah.
So, Larry asked a pretty good question there. When Nashville Superspeedway opened and they announced, hey, we're going to bring an open wheel race to Middle Tennessee. Russ, you and I have had this conversation for 25 years to that point. I actually used that term one night on a radio show, ground sucking Widowmakers, and he calls me and says, "You're out of your mind. I can't believe you did that." But that's about what they appeared to be. What marketing geniuses. Say what you want to about the group. Marketing wise, they've been geniuses because they came into Middle Tennessee and just won over the population, the race fans, and media people, most of whom said never ever.
Right.
And you predicted it, Russ. I think
Yeah.
we had this conversation because I was skeptical, and you said no. Once area fans get a look at them, up close look, and feel them, hear them, smell them, and everything else, they'll like it. And you were right, weren't you?
Well, I mean, the speed is one thing. I mean, gosh, we could go to Nashville Superspeedway and see race cars running laps at an average speed of over 200 miles an hour. I mean, that's still pretty impressive. And when you walk down as low as you can go in the grandstands and you see the car come by at 200 miles an hour,
Yes.
you know, it's
It'll scare you.
It will, yeah.
It will scare you.
It will.
And also
Well-
the timing was fortuitous from the personality standpoint because you had Ms. Patrick making a splash in Indy, you know, the most celebrated probably professional athlete in the country at the time, and she was coming to Gladeville to race.
Yeah.
You had Elio Castroneves, you know, glamorous guy, everybody knew Elio. You had
Even before dancing.
Even before dancing, before he started dancing. You had, you know, all those other
And
great
Dario, I mean, we had the local times with Dario.
Local angle with
Tony Kanaan
yeah.
was good.
All those guys
I
were
forget
great.
who
Just-
Malcolm and I made a Bubba out of somebody, and
Oh, yeah.
you remember that? He actually kept it in his
Philippe
trailer.
Giafone.
That's who it was, Giafone.
Sure was. Bubba
And-
Giafone.
Yeah, and you know, can't have Malcolm West, who will be our guest next week, says you can't have a race in Middle Tennessee without a Bubba. So we just picked Giafone because we like the name Giafone. Well, you know,
Played right along with
a
it,
little
didn't he?
little official certificate. Year later, he comes. It's still in his trailer. You know, he's like, "Look, I'm still an official Bubba."
But you had A.J. Foyt wandering
Yeah.
around, limping around in the garage in his cowboy boots. You had the famous Andretti clan in the infield still racing, and uncles and grandpas and everybody around. It was something that appealed to the media tremendously, and then I think the media appeal spread to the fans. We started writing about all these great people and how easy they were to work with, just a pleasure to work with compared to some of the NASCAR guys that were undergoing the transition into the PR area at that point. So it was just a great win-win relationship, and that's why, Russ, I was puzzled after the 2008 season when Indy packed up its little open wheel cars and left.
But
And I still am.
well, but that was if you look, you have a better idea. My impression of the history of open wheel cars, though, is that's not unusual. That's kind of their modus operandi. They come in, things look great, and then all of a sudden, well, we are great, and then it's, you know, I really took the way they left Nashville as Indianapolis sending a signal, something along the lines of a red hot poker. Now, part of what happened to Larry before that, there were actually two open wheel groups. One was the leftover of the old Champ cars, or what was left of it, the Indy cars that Tony George had created and had survived with and made successful, saying we're just going to race on ovals.
Right.
Well, when they merged back together, they wanted more road courses, which in my mind, if you look at where they are now, kind of shows that is not the direction they needed to go. Nashville was an oval, they needed to get rid of it. And so rather than just saying we're not coming back to Nashville, quite honestly, my understanding is that they jacked the fees up so high that it became virtually impossible to be affordable to run in Nashville.
For a track that size.
Yeah. But Russ, if you go back and look, USAC, CART, Champ, all of these open wheel series wind up with 3 or 4 or 5 owners of 3 or 4 or 5 teams, Larry, and when they get unhappy, they just go. They take their ball and go play somewhere
Take the
else.
car
I mean,
and
is that fair?
Goes home.
That's really not too far off the mark. And the merger, you're right, the merger was a part of it. I mean, 2008 was the first year of the merger, but it happened early in the calendar year, so basically the schedule was already set. The IndyCar schedule was already set, and the next year they had to basically combine the IndyCar and Champ Car schedules into one. And in 2008 they didn't go to Toronto. In 2009 they went back to Toronto. I mean, they had some you know, historic races on the Champ Car circuit that they needed to merge in with the IndyCar, and Nashville, I think, was a victim of that.
Russ, I think something intriguing this year is going to be the Indy doubleheaders. We're talking about off camera. I think is it 4 weekends when
4
the IndyCar
weekends this
series
year.
is going to run two races at the same track on one weekend. What was it, Friday, Sunday?
Saturday, Sunday.
Saturday, Sunday, so back-to-back races.
Right.
Is that going to? How's that going to work ticket-wise, or do they care about tickets? Is it more of a made-for-TV event?
No, I think that's the reason they're doing it. They're doing it at, they're doing it at Detroit. I should know this. I think they're doing it at Sonoma and a couple of others. The thing is, if you're a race fan and you're paying to go, now you're going to get double the bang for your buck.
And you're already there.
So
you're already
ticket
there. I guess
covers both events.
Well, I don't know. I haven't heard that. I don't know what the ticket deal is going to be. But you've got one travel expense, and you're going to get to see 2 races.
I was just saying, the courage to go to Detroit to sell tickets at this point in time. I mean, that's
no. I can see
courageous.
pluses and minuses. Like you say, the travel factors there. You bought your plane ticket or spent your gas for your car. You got your hotel room. It's just a matter of keeping it one more night. So from that standpoint, I guess what I was looking at was how much is too much. But you're right. Racing fans, if you ran 2 Cup races back to back, the race fans would stay over and watch them, I'm sure.
That is an old Bob Harmon move.
Yeah.
Quite honestly,
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a short. I mean, it's an old short track move, and I kind of applaud them for taking that risk to see what happens.
Sure. I mean, try it and see. They did double headers back in the 60s at places like Michigan and Texas, and it worked there. And when I was a teenager, first time I ever went to the Formula One race at Watkins Glen, the main reason we went was because they was running a USAC Silver Crown dirt race in Syracuse the day before. We got to do 2 races on a New York trip for the price of 1 trip. Yep. So that's basically was the selling point. Well, yeah, we'll go if we can get 2 big races in 1 week.
If it works, NASCAR will steal it. You know that.
And say they invented it, yeah.
But what I say, it's really no different than what NASCAR does. You know, we get Friday, we get trucks. Saturday, you get Nationwide. Sunday, you get the Cup guys. Well, you make 1 trip, you get 3 races. Unfortunately, to make that 1 trip to get 3 races, by the time you buy 3 tickets, you're broke.
Right.
And it's tempting to say the NASCAR races would be too grueling or longer, tougher, maybe more physical. But then in the old days, we'd see drivers like Busch. He'd run the truck race one night, the Nationwide race the next day, and the Cup race the next day. So I never really bought into that. It's too grueling and too grinding. I think they'd race 7 days a week if somebody'd put them on the track.
And Bobby Allison and Ken Schrader would. And
oh yeah, every day.
Yeah.
Russ, you spent a great deal of time working with the folks at the Indianapolis 500. You've spent a great deal of time with the open wheel cars. One of the things that has made NASCAR stable over the years is, like it or not, the key has been there's always been that one I am. And the I wannabes around were all family.
Right.
Either by blood or by philosophy. There has never been that kind of strength in the open wheel field. Will there ever be? To where there's going to be, you know, is Tony George going to be the Bill France Jr.?
I don't
that will pull everything together and keep it there?
I don't think so. I mean, I think he's pretty much had his shot at it, and it didn't work out, and that's why the IndyCar part of the sport's in the shape it's in now.
Who's next? Who's the next one to get a shot at? Who can do it?
That's a good question. They're undergoing a search right now. They have a Boston consulting company that is searching for the next guy on the top rung of the ladder.
I think a lot of the IndyCar problems and failures, frankly, can be traced directly to Tony George's doorstep, office door. I think when they raced out here, there's a lot of problems. I remember I tried for 5 or 6 years to get an interview with him. He was always too busy. You could go to Daytona, walk up to Bill France Jr. or Sr.'s door, tell the secretary who you were, and he'd wave you in. And it was that easy. You didn't have to make an appointment. You just show up, and if Mr. the old man or Bill Jr. were in there, you were in. And what can I do for you? Sit down, put his feet up, and talk as long as you was talking. Tony George never could get past 2 or 3 layers of PR people. And I thought then this might be a problem, and sure enough, I think it is. And it's not just me, a media person, complaining about how hard his job is. As you travel around and you talk to people and you read about people with other experiences, Tony George is the one common denominator that comes up when you talk about open wheel racing's problems.
Got to get through 2 or 3 layers of PR people to talk to him. You're talking about Tony George or a Cup driver.
Yeah. Whose league is maybe literally at one point dying from lack of exposure, and you can't get through to him to talk about his league.
That's kind of the way I feel about the Nashville deal, but we'll let that go for right now. When we come back, we're going to talk some about where NASCAR and open wheels mesh at Indianapolis, and also a little bit more about Daytona. Get Russ's thoughts on the new Gen 6 car, 6th generation Cup car. Yeah, okay. Probably if they needed some work on that Gen 6 car, some of them would eventually call USA Motor and Machine over on Cleveland Avenue to get it done. If you want it done and done right, call our friends at USA Motor and Machine over on Cleveland. We'll come back to wrap up this edition of Pit Pass right after this.
Should have brought my poster of the 6th generation.
From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Our final segment here on Pit Pass today with Russ Thompson, statistician, historian, and, comfort to everybody in the booth at
he'll
one
come
point
over
or
to your
another.
house and change your oil if you want him to.
Either that or send his son Ben. Ben's almost 16 now. He'll, odd jobs, you'll hire him out, right?
Sure.
Larry Woody, Joe Williams, as we wrap up here. We talked earlier, and Russ, we talked about being a wealth, and Larry, I don't know about you, never dreamed that A.J. Foyt's first ride at Daytona, at Indianapolis, would have come out of Nashville, much less East Nashville.
We've already learned something hanging around Russ this morning.
Talk about coming full circle, though. The Nashville connections between NASCAR, Indy, and Nashville still remain. Scott Borchetta, Big Machine Records, sponsored the race last year, or was a presenter, I guess is the correct way to put it. Presenting sponsor. Was the sponsor, one of the sponsors on Dan Weldon's car that won the 511.
Right. And a close friend of Weldon's, too, not just a professional relationship.
Yeah.
Borchetta and Weldon had a close personal relationship.
Well, Borchetta's a racer.
Right.
Yeah, in addition to being an absolute
Genius.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the word. I mean, there's no other word for it. Yeah. But he's also a racer. Russ, how do we keep coming up with these? Is it just because it's so close?
That's a lot of it, and I meant to mention that a while ago, and Larry's talking about the success of Indy cars at the Superspeedway here. I mean, we're only 4 hours from Indianapolis, which is the hub. Yeah. I mean, that's where the big fan base is, and it's nothing for those people, to jump on I-65 now and come down here for that race. Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason for its success. Nashville's just a racing town. I mean, we get the numbers for the IndyCar telecast, and Nashville, believe it or not, is always in the top 5, if not the second or third highest rated market for an IndyCar telecast on any given weekend, even if there's a big NASCAR race on. It's just, I'm surprised just talking to people all the time about how many people from Nashville go to the Indy 500.
And Russ, that was one of the things that was so disappointing about our continued struggles here. It's not for a lack of racing fans, because there are jillions of them out there. As you read those marketing figures for NASCAR races, Indy races, the Nashville TV market's one of the highest rated in the country, and for several years was the highest rated. Nashville and Charlotte were just kind of neck and neck for TV ratings for NASCAR stuff, and then IndyCar stuff's up there. But for whatever reason, they just didn't turn out at the fairgrounds in big numbers. Now, my theory was our fans were sophisticated and used to major league events. We're a big league city, and NASCAR and Dover is trying to sell us minor league events, second and third tier, but still that doesn't explain it entirely. I'm still at a loss with all these jillions of fans around here, as you said, why we can't have any. We've got race fans, but no racing.
But I think you're exactly right, and here's some examples to point that out. I mean, you go back to the 80s. When Gary Baker would bring in those Cup guys,
yep.
You could bring in Bill Elliott for the Ford Dealers 200, and the place would be packed.
Yep.
You bring in one guy, he brought in Rusty Wallace one week, the place was packed.
Bobby Allison
one week, yeah. I mean, he brought in Earnhardt a couple of different times.
Yep.
He drove Formosa's car once, drove Greg Bickley's car once.
Yep.
Place was packed. Here's my favorite example. Look at the night they opened NASCAR Cafe.
Yep.
Estimates are that 25,000 people were lining the streets downtown, lining Broadway. They didn't even see a race car. All they did was see race car drivers get out of a limousine and walk down a red carpet. But like you said, they were the top echelon. They were the upper tier race car drivers. And I think Nashville fans have been spoiled.
That's what I think, and it's not just theory. I've got a good friend that lives in Murfreesboro, Don Christopher, who went to NASCAR to Daytona for about 30 years with me. He's never been to the Superspeedway and lives down the road from it. He says, now if they get a cup race, I'll be the first one in line for a ticket. But he said, I'm just not interested in truck races and nationwide. Now when Danica's there, he's kind of interested, but he still doesn't go out and buy a ticket. But point being, Russ, I think you're right. It's our fans consider themselves major league fans, and they just didn't turn out for the so-called minor league events.
Is he more interested now that Danica's about to be single? Now, Russ, the other connection, I guess, between NASCAR, the Brickyard, and here's the thing, you know, when that was first announced, NASCAR Cup going to Indianapolis, they're going to race on the Yard of Bricks. Oh my!
Holy ground.
Oh man!
Sacrilegious.
Yeah, it was.
You know, and this, I mean, 80 teams tried to enter the first time to get a stall so they could get in to try to make this race. Kind of falling off a little bit now. Is it because the track's flat, it's not really great racing, or there's still that aura?
Combination of things.
Okay.
The aura has worn off. The Goodyear tire debacle of a few years ago probably was the biggest thing that hurt them.
Which people probably forgot about, but go.
The average speed of the race was 3 miles an hour, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they literally had to throw a mandated caution every 10 laps so the cars could pit, so they weren't blowing tires.
But even before that debacle, the interest had was on a downhill slide.
I mean, the racing there is not great. It's not built for stock cars. It's a flat track. To have a good stock car race, you pretty much got to have high banks.
Yeah.
And
it was living on Indy's reputation for years, and after that wore thin, they frankly didn't have a whole lot left going for them.
Absolutely. And the thing is, and it's evolved that way into the 500. For so many years, Indy didn't have to market their races. They put a race on the schedule and opened the gates, and the place was filled.
It was the Indy 500, enough said.
Right.
Well, kind of like Bristol.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Same thing. Yep. Open the gates. We're racing at Bristol Cup cars in waiting list for tickets.
For both of them.
Right.
And now, you start seeing advertising for both of them.
Yep.
Exactly.
And tickets for sale in newspapers and publications. Well, Russ, what is the future of open wheel racing, the old IndyCar series as we used to call it? Is it viable? Is it healthy? Or is it like some other things, maybe some bumps down the road? And part of it starts again with the economy. A lot of the big dollar sponsorships are kind of drying up right now. What do you see as you look down the road?
I hope they've been through the bumpy part. I hope things from here on are going to be positive and move in an upward, fashion. A lot of it's going to depend on who these people are that they put in the key positions. I mean, they just fired the guy that they hired to bring in and turn the deal around, and he did a lot of positive things. Randy Bernard did a lot of good things for the series, but they've got to get somebody in there. They've got to get a good rudder on the ship, and until we see who that is, it's I don't know, it's just guessing.
As an outsider looking in, I thought he caught some unfair criticism at times. I thought people, including drivers and teams, blamed him for some things that maybe wasn't his fault, some problems with tracks and stuff. Now, I guess you could say, well, it's his responsibility to make sure everything's running well, but again, I'm just not sure he's the really fall guy in the whole thing.
Well, but John Bibb took a lot of grief for you too, Larry.
Yeah, they said, Bibb, it's your fault for hiring him. I remember how many times did you have to say that. But no, you think
But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You got to have that head guy, which has been a big problem in IndyCar racing. Then they finally got it. I mean, Bill France took a lot of flack for a lot of things that happened in NASCAR that probably weren't his direct fault, but he's the guy sitting on top of the pyramid.
He's the boss.
Yeah.
What about Danica Patrick? What was your take on her? You and I have had these conversations. From the media standpoint, she was great because she got a ton of publicity for the league at IndyCars, and now she's getting a ton of publicity for NASCAR. What's your take on Danica?
She's a talented driver. She was very talented in go-karts. I know some people that were very close with her in go-karts, and at the time said she was going to be good. She was good in IndyCars on ovals. Yeah. She's not a very good road course racer, and I honestly don't think she's ever going to turn out to be a very good stock car racer.
Really? Why?
No. I don't know exactly why. I just think, it's so much different.
Same reason Dario Franchitti didn't turn out to be a very good stock
Well,
car. It's just
and that's
not his.
but that's not fair to him. He didn't have the right circumstances, and he didn't have very much time. If he were given the equipment and the time frame that Danica's had, I guarantee you, he'd turn out to be a stock car racer. It's such a different world. I mean, the downforce on the Indy cars and the tires and the grip level, and people don't realize how little of that there is in a NASCAR stock car. I mean, you're running on 9-inch wide tires with 800 horsepower, and that's, I mean, Ben said this to me the other day. He said, people don't understand how hard it is to drive a stock car at the limit. Now, anybody can get out and drive a stock car at 95%, but that last 5% is what puts you in the Jimmy Johnson and the Tony Stewart and the Matt Kenseth level, and that last 5% is way harder than most people understand.
I was impressed by Danica's decision not to try to do the double header this year, Indy 500 and Coke 600 at Charlotte. I always thought that was a gimmick, and it detracted from both efforts and wasn't fair to either team to try to do. It's impossible to do both, run two of the biggest races on the same day.
Well,
so to her credit, she turned down what would have been, the biggest sports story of the weekend, Danica's doubleheader, just to concentrate her efforts at Charlotte, and I thought that was, again, to her credit. I think it shows her dedication to her NASCAR commitment.
She should have done that 2 years ago instead of trying to split and do both. I think she really diluted her effort in 2010 by trying to do, or 11, I guess it was, trying to do partial IndyCar season, partial NASCAR. Full IndyCar season, partial NASCAR.
Yeah, you just can't do both.
No.
So, Russ Thompson, you will be a part of the 24 hours of Daytona coverage starting
26,
couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Next week. And through all the IndyCar races. Indy's TV package will be where this year?
5 races on ABC, which will start at Indy, and they've done a really good thing this year. They've basically got, it's kind of like TNT does with NASCAR. They've got the summer races. They're doing Indy. They're doing both Detroit races. They're doing Texas. Texas on ABC for the first time in prime time network. Texas, which is usually the best race of the IndyCar season. And then Iowa, and going back to Pocono for the first time since 1989.
And when you see those stats flash up on your TV screen, we can say, that's Russ Thompson.
But to answer your question, the rest of the season is going to be on NBC Sports Network.
Okay. Yeah, and when you think the guy behind the microphone is just a genius, no, he's not. It's Russ Thompson.
He's just reading what Russ wrote down.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Like I did for many years.
Exactly. Russ, thank you for coming in. I hope we can talk you into coming back later. Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I don't know why you'd want me back, but...
No, he's not committing, Larry. What'd you do to him?
We'll get the inside scoop. We'll get him back.
Larry, hope you have a great week. We'll be back next week.
Did you need to mention some friends of ours at the...
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about breakfast this morning.
Breakfast
this morning over at the Batter's Box, which was delicious. They're now serving breakfast. They're over at 43 Hermitage Avenue. So breakfast, lunch, dinner. Man, I love eggs.
Russ, you know how important sponsors are, don't you?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Absolutely. Folks, we want to thank you for joining us today. We'll be back, hopefully, next week with more. Malcolm West, scheduled to be our special guest. You've heard him on a microphone across the South, and man, can he tell
He's shorter,
some stories.
much shorter than he sounds on radio.
He's Larry Wooding. I'm Joe Williams. We'll see you next time on Pit Pass.